Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining me today to listen to my presentation. My name is Selina and I am a researcher working at University College London. Today I'm going to be talking to you about variations in A&E attendances and emergency admissions. Let's start off with a little bit of background to this research, and that will lead us on to our specific research aims. We know that A&E attendances and emergency admissions for children have been increasing over the last decade, and infants under the age of 1 are a particularly vulnerable group. These infants need specialist assessments and treatments if they've got serious conditions. It's completely understandable that parents may turn up at A&E if they're worried about their infant and not sure what's wrong with them. However, the number of parents showing up with their infants in A&E departments outweighs the limited resources that are currently available in these A&E departments. This has been leading to longer waiting times and overcrowded in these A&E departments. There are quite a large amount of avoidable attendances which are often quite high in infants. However, we want to avoid these inappropriate A&E attendances. And this can only be done if infants who do not have urgent requirements are treated elsewhere, either in the community or in primary care. So the fact that parents are showing up with their infants in A&E departments for minor injuries or minor problems could be an indicator that these parents are not aware of the services available in the primary care or community. NHS England have acknowledged the pressure that A&E departments are under. In their long-term plan, they have suggested extension of out-of-hospital and out-of-hours services so that parents could feel comfortable going to these services instead of showing up at A&E departments. Therefore, to understand the drivers of these increases in A&E attendances and emergency admissions, it's important to look at variations by local authority which will enable us to make policy-relevant changes. On the right-hand side of these slides is a graph showing the A&E attendances and emergency admissions of infants under 1 in the last decade. And as you can see, both have been increasing throughout the years, but there are differences depending on which part of England you're from. This graph is just an example of the comparison between London and the rest of England. This leads us nicely onto the 3 main objectives for this project. The first 2 were to look at variations in A&E attendances and emergency admissions for infants under 1 year old by region and also by local authorities in England. And the last objective was to understand the proportion of variations that is explained by individual or family level factors. So for example, birth characteristics or socioeconomic position. A brief outline of the datasets that we use as a part of this project. We use hospital episode statistics for financial years 2012/13 to 2016/17. The 2 datasets that we focused on were the A&E dataset and the admitted patient care dataset. These 2 datasets together included information on A&E attendances and emergency admissions. We extracted this information for infants under 1 year old. We also used a mother-baby linked birth cohort held at UCL, which was constructed by a number of my colleagues that have worked here. This cohort included information on single-to births across England, and it included a number of variables that we were interested in using as a part of our analysis, such as a socioeconomic indicator, infant birth characteristics such as sex, gestational age at birth, a congenital anomaly, ethnicity, and we also had information on mother's age at birth. This is an outline of how all of the individual datasets were linked to each other. The A&E and APC data were linked to each other using the guidelines provided by NHS Digital. So a key factor that is important for linking these data is the HES ID, which is a unique anonymized identifier for each patient. This enables us to follow individuals over time longitudinally and also link them to other data sets. So once the A&E and APC data were linked to each other, this was then linked to the UCL birth cohort, and then we ended up with one final cohort for analysis. The statistical steps that we took were as follows. We conducted complete case analysis on all of those in the cohort that had complete data. The follow-up of each infant was done so that their start date was their discharge date from their delivery admission and their end date was their first birthday. So we had data on each infant ideally for 1 year. We constructed funnel plots to look at variations by local authority, and then we conducted multi-level modelling to look at variations that is accounted by local authority level and also individual level factors. And we used variance partition coefficients to look at these variations by local authority or individual level factors. Moving on to the results now. This is a bar chart of A&E attendances and emergency admissions by regions across England. I have broken up the emergency admissions by emergency admissions via A&E, so this would have been parents that would have taken their infant to A&E and then the infant would have been admitted. Or I have shown the direct admissions, which is often made by GPs. So these are infants who did not end up going to A&E, but they had an emergency admission. I would like to draw your attention to the red circle, which shows that in London, although there was a high rate of emergency attendances, but actually very low rate of emergency admissions compared to the rest of England. So this replicates previous findings that we saw on slide 1. We now move on to the funnel plots demonstrating local authority variations. This is a funnel plot of A&E attendance variations by local authority. You can see that even after adjusting for child level characteristics, the dots only slightly move into the centre. This suggests that child level factors are accounting for a small amount of the variations. Moving on to looking at local authority variation in emergency admissions now. Here we can see that although there is some variations, it's not as much as we saw in the previous slide, which showed variations in A&E attendances. Again, here we see that even after adjusting for child level characteristics, it makes very little difference to the variations. Finally, I'm going to talk about the multi-level models that we constructed for both A&E attendances and emergency admissions. This is a forest plot displaying the key findings from the multi-level models. You can see here that for A&E attendances and emergency admissions, these were higher for males, and also if infants were born preterm or with congenital anomaly, they were more likely to have A&E attendances and emergency admissions. And at the bottom of the forest plot, you can see there that compared to those in the least deprived areas, those in the most deprived areas had higher A&E attendances and emergency admissions. In terms of how much of the variation is accounted for by local authority or individual level factors, we use the VPC to estimate this. Within our model, we can see that approximately 8% and 6% of the variations are accounted for by local authority. This means that quite a large proportion of our model is accounted for by variations in individual level factors. However, although it may seem like that most of the variation is accounted for by individual level factors, comparing this with our funnel plots earlier, we saw visually that actually they were accounting for very little of the variation. In summary, let's revisit the main research aims for this project. So the first two were to look at local authority and regional variations in A&E attendances and emergency admissions. We found that in the North East and London had the highest A&E attendances while the South West had the lowest, and we saw some variations by local authority, although they were not accounted for much by individual level factors. In terms of emergency admissions, we found that the North East had the highest emergency admissions, which may not be surprising given that they also had high attendances. However, interestingly, we had low emergency admissions in London, which replicated previous findings. We also saw some variations according to local authorities, but it was less compared to A&E attendances. Finally, we found that a large amount of our models were accounted for by individual level variations, but linking this finding back to the funnel plots, we saw that this actually accounted for little. So this means that there may be other factors that are accounting for variations in A&E attendances and emergency admissions which are not available in our data. So this could be factors such as hospital level factors, parity, so parents who are first-time parents may be more likely to bring their children to A&E compared to parents who have had subsequent children. Or alternatively, it could be factors such as the parent's perception of services that are available for them and where to take their infants if their infants are unwell. Thank you so much for listening to me. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me on my email address. I would like to acknowledge NIHR for supporting this research and for this work to happen. And I'd like to end by thanking my colleagues for supporting me with this work, and David Cromwell for providing me with data syntax to produce the funnel plots for this presentation.